We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone.
We have ignition.
हम ज़मीन के रहने वालों की तरफ से आपको खुश आमदीद कहते हैं।
Hola y saludos a todos.
Greetings and friendly wishes to all who may encounter this Voyager and receive this message.
Hello.
We step into the universe with humility and hope.
Hello from the children, from the children of planet Earth. Hello from the children, from the children of planet Earth. Hello from the children. From the children. Hello. Hello from the children. From the children of planet Earth.
Hello, greetings mga ka-spacers natin out there from Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. And sa lahat po ng ating mga ka-spacers na nakatutok po ngayon worldwide and netwide, magandang araw po sa inyong lahat. This is your ka-spacer and space commander, Professor Jun Cajigal, welcoming you to another discussion. And ngayon po ay pag-uusapan natin kung talagang fake yung Apollo landing. Remember mga ka-spacers, last July 20, we celebrated the International Moon Day 2022 in commemoration of the Apollo 11 landing on July 20 of 1969. And maraming maraming issues and controversies about the Apollo 11 landing, and marami nagsasabi na fake yun. And in fact, nag-post po yung mga members ng BSYA about International Moon Day and some facts about Apollo 11, yan, like sila Michael Collins, yung Eagle, and may mga nag-comment po na fake daw yun, yung Apollo 11. And marami na rin po ako napanood na documentaries about the Apollo 11 landing, at doon sa mga documentaries ngayon, fake daw at sa studio daw ginawa yung Apollo 11 landing. Ginawa nila, finilm nila yan sa isang malaking studio, and they tried to simulate yung lunar landscape. Then meron silang mock-up model ng lunar module at doon nila finilm yung landing. So pinalabas nila na fake yan, na hindi talaga sila sa buwan, na nasa studio sila. So marami na rin po akong napanood na ganyan na documentaries sa YouTube, sa mga DVDs about the conspiracy theories about the Apollo 11. Pero alam niyo mga ka-spacers, if you will ask me, hindi po ako naniniwala. And I believe that Apollo 11 really took place. Yung landing ng Apollo 11 ay tunay yan. Remember mga ka-spacers, mas mahirap ipeke yung Apollo landing kaysa yung the real thing. And in fact, marami ng sakripisyo ang mga Amerikano sa space program nila. Remember, namatay ang 3 astronauts sa Apollo 1 pa lang, no? Nagsisimula pa lang yung Apollo program, may namatay na 3 astronauts. So I don't think na yung kamatayan nila ay magiging baliwala, no? So ipepeke lang nila yun, so baliwala yung kanilang kamatayan. Parang hindi po ako sang-ayon dyan, at hindi naman po ganun ang tingin ko sa mga nagtatrabaho sa NASA and those who are involved in the space program ng NASA. So meron po akong nabasang article, and I would like to share this with you. Hindi ko po inaangkin yung article na to. Maganda itong article na to about debunking yung Apollo 11 conspiracy theories. And ito po yung gusto kong i-share sa inyo mga ka-spacers. Alright, so ito po yung title ng article. Yan na nakita ko. Yan, this article was made by the Royal Museums, Greenwich. And itong article na to na nakita ko, again po mga ka-spacers, I'm giving credit to kung sino man nagsulat nito. In behalf of the Royal Museums Greenwich, hindi po akin to, this is not my article. Nakita ko lang po ito, and siguro ito pong article na ito ay magbibigay linaw kung talagang peke po yung Apollo 11 landing. Kasi nakakasawa na rin po Alam niyo, marami na rin po akong napanood na documentaries, mga articles, and marami nagsasabi na peke yan, hindi totoo yung Apollo 11. Parang sinabi niyo na hindi bilog yung mundo, na ang mundo ay flat. And, alam niyo yun, meron pa mga tao na naniniwala na ang mundo ay flat. Biruin niyo yun, no? Parang nakakasawa na talaga. And kinunan na nga ng picture ng Apollo 8 ang mundo natin, no? Nanggaling na sila sa buwan, and they took a picture of the Earth, yung tinatawag nilang Earthrise. Kitang-kita na nabilog yung mundo. Tapos sasabihin nila na flat yung mundo natin, mga flat earthers. No, biruin nyo yun mga ka-spacers, no? At pinagdidiinan nila na ang mundo daw ay flat. Biruin nyo yun, kinuhanan na nga ng picture ng Apollo 8, yung famous na Earthrise photo na yan. Kitang-kita na nga na bilog yung buwan. Saan pa kayo? No? And eto ngayon, no? Marami din nagsasabi na peke yung Apollo 11 landing. Alright, so siguro sa pamamagitan ng article na to na ginawa ng Royal Museum sa Greenwich, magbibigay linaw po na ang landing ng Apollo 11 ay tunay na hindi peke. Alright, so ito po yung title ng article, Moon Landing Conspiracy Theories Debunked. Yes, Apollo 11 did go to the moon. No, the US flag isn't waving in the wind. Hindi ba kasasabi lang natin nun sa ating online lecture about the secrets of the moon, kung naalala po ninyo yan, which was live streamed last sa July 20, itong Wednesday lang na ito of 2022. Binanggit ko po dun sa live stream na yan that the moon has no atmosphere. Paano magkakahangin doon, no? Alright, so ayan po yung title ng ating article na nakita ko po sa internet. Moon Landing Conspiracy Theories Debunked. Ayan, so isa-isin po natin itong nilalaman ng article na to. And comment down kayo po mga ka-spacers, no? I would like to hear from you kung ano yung inyong mga ideas or comments, kung naniniwala po kayo sa mga conspiracy theories about Apollo 11. Peke ba talaga yung Apollo 11 landing? Please comment down below kung ano yung mga opinion ninyo, yung mga reactions ninyo. And don't forget mga ka-spacers to like and share this video para ma-inspire naman natin yung mga estudyante para maliwanagan sila, no? Lalo na yung mga hindi naniniwala sa Apollo 11 lunar landing. Hindi peke ang Apollo 11 landing. Tunay na nangyari yan. So please like and share this video. And don't forget to follow our Facebook page, the Bedan Society of Young Astronomers. Please follow our Facebook page also, the Sky Watchers Society of Las Piñas. And also please follow me on my Facebook page, the Science Guy Ka-Spacers channel. And also mga ka-spacers, meron po akong YouTube channel, the Science Guy Professor June Cajigal. And don't forget to like and subscribe, no? Please like and subscribe para makapagbigay pa ako ng mga kaalaman about space sciences, astronomy. Ayan po, bilang tulong nyo na rin po sa akin yan. Alright po, salamat po mga ka-spacers, and let's go. Basahin natin itong article na to about debunking yung mga conspiracy theories about the Apollo 11 landing. Alright, so sinasabi dito sa article, the moon landings were fake. Apollo 11 didn't land on the moon. Apollo 11 didn't happen. Humans never set foot on the moon. Ayan. Heard all this before? Ayan, di ba? Narinig na natin to eh. Napanood na natin to sa mga different documentary films. Sa Netflix, meron po niyan, no? Conspiracy theories surrounding the moon landings have proved worryingly persistent in the 50 years since Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin took their first small steps on the lunar surface. Ayan, no? So after nung pag-apak nila Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin sa buwan, hindi na sila tinantanan ng mga conspiracy theories na peke yung ginawa nilang lunar landing. No? Alright, NASA's landmark achievement is still being challenged. So parang, ano ba itong NASA na to? Ano bang makukuha nila kung pineke nila yung lunar landing, no? Yan, so parang may mga tao na hindi makapaniwala na nanggaling na tayo sa buwan. Alright, despite there being a wealth of information online, yan, di ba, marami na rin mga documentaries about that, debunking these conspiracy theories, the cries of hoax continue. No, bakit kaya? No, bakit kaya ang mga tao parang karamihan sa kanila, no, hindi sila naniniwala na naglanding nga yung Apollo 11. No, parang sinasabi na rin ng mga flat earthers na hindi bilog ang mundo kundi flat. Ganun po. Ay naku, bakit kaya sila ganyan, no? Alright. So tuloy natin ang pagbasa dito sa article na to. Now we find ourselves awash in an ocean of information online. National Space Center Discovery Director Professor Anhu Ojha said during a 2019 lecture at Royal Museums Greenwich. No, so sabi ni Professor Ojha, sana na-pronounce ko yun ng tama. Right, ang sinabi niya, no? There has been more data produced in the last 2 years than in the whole of human history. This information ocean is getting more turbulent every single day. He continued. No? So the only tools we have to navigate through this maelstrom are the critical thinking skills that we are trying to develop in people as scientists. Ayan po sinabi niya. So how can science help debunk the moon landing conspiracy theories? Ayan po yung sinabi ni National Space Center Discovery Director Professor Anu Ojha. Ayan po. Alright. So tuloy po natin mga ka-spacers. Ngayon kung meron po kayong mga comments, please comment down below. Type nyo lang po, gusto ko kayong marinig at magparamdaman po kayo. Magparamdam kayo kung ano yung inyong mga reactions dito. Alright. So ito yung conspiracy theory number 1. Yan. Alright. So how can science help to debunk moon landing conspiracy theories? Ito yung unang conspiracy theory mga ka-spacers. Ayan, ito. Alright, conspiracy theory number 1, shadows in the moon landing photos prove the images were faked. Wow, o nga no? So, let's take a look at the image below. Ito po yung image na tinutukoy po dito sa artikulo na to, no? And at the full panorama on the NASA website. Look closely at the shadows cast by astronaut Neil Armstrong and another object just out of shot. Ayan, so kung mapapansin nyo dito sa larawan na ito, so itong shadow na ito daw, ito yung shadow ni Neil Armstrong, then meron dito isang object. Alright? So kung ano daw mapapansin nyo sa photo na ito. Alright? Okay, so ito yung shadow that was cast. Ito yung shadow ni Neil Armstrong. Alright, so kung mapapansin niyo yung shadow ni Neil Armstrong and tong object na ito ay hindi daw parallel. They are not parallel. This image has been taken as proof by conspiracy theories that the moon landings were faked. Surely if the sun were the only source of light, then the shadows should be parallel. Doesn't this prove that the whole scene was mocked up in a studio? Ayan, doon. Matagal ko na naririnig ito daw sa studio daw ginawa yung Apollo 11 landing with multiple light sources creating different shadow patterns. Di ba kasi sa studio, maraming light sources dun eh. Di ba? Para maganda yung illumination ng artista. Di ba? Kagaya ko ngayon, meron akong ilaw dito. Meron akong ilaw dito para pogi tayo, di ba? Sa harap ng camera. No, at kung ang sinasabi dito, kung yung sun lang daw yung source of light, dapat parallel yung shadow. Hindi daw eh. O diba, hindi parallel. So, ibig sabihin yan, hindi sa moon kinunan yan, kundi sa studio na with multiple light sources. No? Right, so I hope tama yung aking paliwanag. Yan. So, tuloy natin yung article, mga ka-spacers. So, sinasabi dito, well, no. This is on the surface of the moon, sabi. But we can reproduce this effect anytime we want to on Earth. Yan, sabi ni Professor Ojha. So ito yung kanyang explanation. You have all seen this phenomena yourself, where because of perspective, parallel lines appear to be non-parallel. If you are trying to reduce onto a two-dimensional plane and a three-dimensional situation, you can make lines, do all sorts of weird things. Yan, artists have been using this for centuries. Yan, go outside when the sun is low in the sky and see this effect yourself. Yan, just like the images from Apollo 11, the shadows will not be parallel. Yan, so na-debunk daw ito. Alright? So, itong phenomena na ito ay makikita daw din natin dito sa Earth. Yan, sabi ni Professor Ojha. Alright? Okay, so tunay daw, no? Tunay. Alright? Tunay yung image na to. Legit. Legit daw to. Alright? Yan. You have seen this phenomena yourself where because of perspective, parallel lines appear to be non-parallel. If you are trying to reduce onto a two-dimensional plane, a three-dimensional situation, you can make lines do all sort of weird things. Yan, artists have been doing this for centuries. So yun sinasabi ni Professor Ojha. Okay po. So ayan po. So sinasabi ni Professor, legit po itong picture. Ayan, alright? Kahit hindi daw parallel yung shadow niya. So ayan mga ka-spacers. So before we proceed with conspiracy theory number 2, let's watch this video about yung shadow na yan, no? That caused that conspiracy theory na fake yung moon landing, about yung lighting, yung illumination na yan. Alright mga ka-spacers, let's watch this.
Many a conspiracy theorist has claimed that because photographs show multiple shadows of different lengths and angles, there had to have been an additional light source, such as a large lamp on site. Well, actually, because Neil and Buzz were snapping pics on an uneven, brightly lit landscape with the sun hovering just above the horizon, the ground produced a slew of different colors.
Well mga ka-spacers, so I hope that video about those multiple shadows shed some light about the conspiracy theory that was mentioned. Alright, so ituloy po natin yung pagbasa article na yan. Okay, so let us now move to the next conspiracy theory. Alright, so ang sinasabi dito, conspiracy theory number 2, yan, Apollo astronauts could not have survived the Earth's radiation field or tinatawag natin na Van Allen belt. And the Earth is surrounded by a zone of charged particles known as the Van Allen radiation belt. These are regions surrounding the Earth in our magnetic field where high energy trapped particles from the sun tends to get confined. Yun ang sinasabi again ni Professor Ojha. What that means is if we are going into these regions, there are extremely high radiation concerns. So pag dumaan daw yung mga astronauts dyan sa Van Allen belt, they will be exposed to radiation, mamamatay yung mga cells and they won't be able to survive their trip on the moon because they will be suffering from radiation sickness and they will be exposed to radiation from the Van Allen belt. So if that is the case, sinasabi dito sa article, how did the Apollo astronauts travel through the Van Allen radiation belt and out of Earth's orbit unharmed? Surely the amount of radiation would have killed them. Yan, kasi pag pinos nila yung Van Allen belt, they will be exposed to high doses of radiation and hindi nila maso-survive yan. Now, surely the amount of radiation would have killed them. Doesn't this prove that the moon landings were a hoax? Dapat namatay na sila, no? Hindi na sila nakarating sa buwan. Pero bakit pa sila nakarating sa buwan? In spite of the fact that they were exposed to high doses daw of radiation, no? Yan, ito yung sinasabi ni Professor Ojha. Sabi niya, has a killer reply. Ito yung reply niya. No, my answer to that is firewalking, he says. So ito yung sinasabi ni Professor Ojha. Ito yung kanyang explanation. Ayan, so basahin natin mga ka-spacers, no? If you've ever done firewalking, you'll know one thing you don't do is linger around in the middle of the fire pit. You cross as quickly as you can. From a science point of view, as long as you walk across quite quickly, looking at the thermal conductivity of your feet, you are not going to have enough thermal energy going into the soles of your feet to burn you. You're absolutely fine, just don't hang around in the middle. In a similar way, the transit time to the Van Allen radiation belt right at the beginning of the Apollo voyages was incredibly short. Traveling to the Van Allen radiation belt, if you are going fast enough, which you need to be if you're going to the moon, is no problem whatsoever. Ayan, so ang ibig lang sabihin dito ni Professor Ojha na dapat makatawid ka sa Van Allen belt na mabilis. And yun ang ginawa ng Apollo. Lahat ng mga spacecraft, no, yung third stage ng Apollo spacecraft, talagang mabilis, no? Mabilis silang escape dun sa Earth's orbit papunta sa buwan. And natawid nila yung Van Allen belt very quickly. So hindi ganon ka-intense yung kanilang exposure sa radiation. Kung na-expose sila siguro very minimal lang kasi napakabilis ng kanilang pagtawid sa Van Allen belt. So yun yung sasabi ni Professor Ojha na firewalking, parang di ba kung napapansin po ninyo mga ka-spacers, yung mga nasa circus, yung tumatawid sa nagbabagang mga nagbabagang apoy o yung mga uling, no? Mabilis silang tumawid, hindi sila nagtatagal dun sa gitna kundi mapapaso sila. So mabilis silang tumawid dun sa mga nagbabagang uling na yan, hindi sila nasasaktan. So in a similar way, sabi ni Professor Ocha, yung travel time nila through the Van Allen belt maiksi lang, no? I think sinasabi niya, no, maiksi lang yung travel time nila sa Van Allen radiation belt. Yan, the transit time through the Van Allen radiation belt right at the beginning of the Apollo voyages was incredibly short. Yan, para minimal lang yung exposure sa radiation. Kaya na-survive nila at nakarating po sila sa buwan. O, biruin niyo yung mga ka-spacers. So, na-debunk na naman yung itong conspiracy theory number 2, no? Yung kanilang pagtawid sa Van Allen radiation belt. Alright mga ka-spacers, so bago tayo magpatuloy dun sa third conspiracy theory about the Apollo 11 landing, let's watch this video about yung pagtawid sa Van Allen radiation belt. Alright mga ka-spacers, very interesting to. Let's watch this.
There's an invisible magnetic force field surrounding our planet, protecting us from harmful solar winds that could annihilate Earth. But this protective blanket is also a swirling ring full of deadly radiation. And to leave Earth's atmosphere, astronauts have to pass through it. The Van Allen belts are rings of energetically charged particles that have been captured by Earth's magnetic field. They got their name from this physicist, James Van Allen. Back in the 1950s, Van Allen launched a Raccoon, a rocket lifted by a balloon above the atmosphere, and it detected the first hint of radiation at higher altitudes. Then, Explorer 1, the first American satellite to orbit Earth, launched January 13, 1958. Explorer 1 confirmed that Earth's magnetosphere was trapping the subatomic particles. The Van Allen belts were the first major scientific discovery of the early space age, and they posed a serious challenge for space travel. High-speed subatomic particles can tear through DNA, increasing the risks of cancer and other diseases. So sending astronauts through these particles is not ideal, and even though they're flying in a shielded spacecraft, doses of radiation can still seep through. But there's no way around the Van Allen belts. In order to reach space, astronauts have to fly through them. First, there's the inner belt, which is comprised of protons. And then the outer belt, which has mostly high-energy electrons. At one point, Van Allen suggested detonating a nuclear bomb in the inner belt to potentially clear out some of these subatomic particles. This plan never happened, but in 1962, the United States did carry out a nuclear explosion in space dubbed Starfish Prime. They wanted to see if detonating a 1.4 megaton bomb in low Earth orbit could augment and expand the Van Allen belts. But the explosion actually ended up temporarily adding more radiation around our planet. So with little success on that front, it was up to NASA to build a spacecraft with a strong radiation barrier and figure out a flight trajectory that avoided the thickest, most radioactive parts of the belts while traveling as fast as possible. Scientists determined that if the speed of the Apollo spacecraft was about 25,000 kilometers per hour, it would take about 52.8 minutes to pass through the belts. Based on that information, they found that the radiation dose received during that amount of time would be, at most, 11.4 rads, and that's without the protection of a spacecraft. And since a lethal radiation dose for a human is 300 rads in 1 hour, NASA deemed the missions a go. In the end, the average radiation dose on the skin of the Apollo astronauts came out to be 0.38 rad, which is about the same radiation you would receive getting 2 CT scans on your head. So while the Van Allen belts are lethal, they could really only kill an astronaut if they were to spend several days in their radioactive vicinity. And despite the challenges the belts create when leaving Earth, we should actually be thanking them for protecting life on our planet from utter annihilation.
So ayan mga ka-spacers, so I hope that video had shed some light about yung conspiracy theory na yan about the Van Allen radiation belt and how the Apollo 11 astronauts have crossed the Van Allen radiation belt and survived the trip, so they were able to reach and eventually land on the moon. Alright, so I guess we can now proceed with the third conspiracy theory. Alright, so very interesting ito. Ito naman po yung mga pictures na naman about the Apollo 11 landing. Yan, conspiracy theory number 3. Why are there no stars in pictures of the NASA's moon landing? Kasi kung legit po yung picture at hindi ginawa sa studio, dapat may mga makikitang stars, diba ho? Bakit sa mga photos ng Apollo 11 wala pong mga stars? So inisip nila yung mga conspiracy theories na ito baka sa studio ginawa yung landing. Alright, so everybody kindly take a look at this photograph. Ayan so makikita nyo yung background sky, wala nga talagang stars, no? So ito yung pinagdidiinan ng mga conspiracy theories. Ayan, theorist. Alright, so if the image really was taken on the moon, shouldn't the sky be filled with stars? Yan ang sinasabi nila ng mga conspiracy theories na yan. Theorist. Alright. After all, there is no atmosphere to distort the image. No clouds to interrupt that glorious view. Ayan, di ba? So, napakaganda ng photograph na ito. Ayan, pero walang stars. Wala kayong makikitang stars. Alright, conspiracy theories argue that the lack of stars in the Apollo 11 mission photographs prove that the event was staged. Japeke daw mga ka-spacers. NASA could not have faked the full wonder of the lunar sky, and so they simply choose not to include any stars at all. Ayan, yun ang pinagdidiinan ng mga conspiracy theories na yan na dahil walang stars dun sa background sky ng mga photographs ng Apollo 11 japeke na daw yan. Alright, ito yung paliwanag. Here's another solution. Ayan. Alright, both the astronauts and the lunar landscape itself are brightly lit by the sun. The sky may look black, but remember, this is in fact daytime on the moon. If you're going to take a photo of a brightly lit scene, your camera shutter speed needs to be fast enough and your aperture incredibly small. In that situation, faint objects like stars simply aren't going to show up. Ayan po. So siguro sa mga photographers na nanonood ngayon dyan, maiintindihan po nila ito, no? Alright. Okay, and the fact na yung mga stars na yan ay napakalayo, it would take some time for light na to reach dun sa film ng camera. No? Kung ganun kabilis yung shutter, yung pagsara ng shutter, there would be enough, walang time for the light para mai-record ng film ng camera. No? Alright, so na-debunk na naman itong conspiracy theory number 3, ito yung paliwanag dito, no? Alright, so if you're going to take a photo of a brightly lit scene, kagaya nito, yan kasi nasisinagan to ng araw, your camera's shutter speed needs to be fast and your aperture incredibly small. In that situation, faint object like stars simply aren't going to show up. Ayan, yun ang paliwanag kung bakit walang stars sa background sky ng mga Apollo 11 photos. Alright mga ka-spacers, so ayan po, no? So sana nagbigay liwanag, no, sa inyo. Lalo yung mga, siguro yung mga photographers mas maintindihan nila yan. Kasi ako hindi naman ako photographer. Di naman ako ganun kagaling sa photography, pero alam ko marami dyan ng mga amateur, yung mga astronomy enthusiasts na nanonood ngayon na involved sa astrophotography, mas maiintindihan nila ito. Alright mga ka-spacers, so before we proceed, let's watch this video about, again, debunking that conspiracy theory about the absence of stars dun sa background sky ng mga photographs ng Apollo 11. Alright mga ka-spacers, let's watch this!
Another theory involves the stars, or lack thereof. How come there are no stars in the background of all those famous moon photographs? The answer? Nearby objects washed out the film. This is common in nighttime photography, with bright foreground objects effectively erasing distant background objects from the film.
Alright mga ka-spacers, so I hope that video had shed some light about the absence of stars against the background sky in many of the photographs of the Apollo 11 mission. Ayan po, no? So napakagandang paliwanag sa video, and I'm sure makaka-relate dito yung mga astrophotographers na nakatutok po ngayong gabi. So bago po tayo magpatuloy, again po mga ka-spacers, please like and share itong ating video so that we could reach more people, lalong-lalo na po yung mga estudyante out there, so that they would be inspired and be engaged in the sciences, lalong-lalo na po ang astronomy. Alright, so let's proceed now with the next conspiracy theory. Ayan, so ang sinasabi dito ay the Apollo 11 US flag is waving in the wind. But there's no wind on the moon. Ayan, so siguro nakikita niyo po sa ibang mga videos ito na parang nagwe-wave yung American flag. So ibig sabihin no, wala sila sa buwan dahil may hangin. No? Baka nandito lang sila sa Earth. May electric fan dun sa film studio. Biruin niyo po yun, no? And sinasabi dito sa article, one of the crowning moments in terms of US national pride was seeing the stars and stripes, yung bandera ng Amerika on the surface of the moon, sabi ni Professor Oj. Ayan po, nakikita niyo po yan, no? So, maraming naniniwala dito, no? Bakit nagwe-wave yung American flag? Ibig sabihin may hangin sa buwan. Ibig sabihin nun, nandito lang sila sa Earth, baka may electric fan dun sa studio at natatamaan yung American flag na tinusok ng mga Apollo 11 astronauts. Alright, so ayan po, ito yung paliwanag. Alright, so tuloy natin po mga ka-spacers yung pagbasa sa article. Now, Buzz Aldrin saluting the proudly waving American flag on the moon remains one of the iconic images of the Apollo 11 mission. A declaration of US supremacy over the space race rivals the Soviet Union. At kung natatandaan niyo po mga ka-spacers, diba? Saan pa man nagsimula ito? Diba sa space race yung bangayan ng USSR, yung Soviet Union, saka yung mga Amerikano, kung sino yung mauuna, who will reign supreme sa space, no? Yun ang yun ang nila bangayan nila, no? Lalo space race. Alright, tuloy natin ang pagbasa sa artikulo. But if there is no atmosphere on the moon, there is no wind. So why is the flag waving? As you can see in this photograph, na bakit parang nagwe-wave nga yung American flag. Right? Okay, so why is the flag waving daw? So is this the proof that conspiracy theorists have been seeking? Baka kung nagwe-wave may hangin, so hindi sila nakapunta sa buwan. So look again at the image. And in particular, along the top edge of the flag, you would find the answer. A telescopic pole that has been extended along the top in order to make the flag fly proudly. So, kung mapapansin ninyo mga ka-spacers, yan ito please follow my cursor. Ayan. So, nakikita niyo ito, may parang horizontal pole na kinabit. Ito po. No? Ayan, para magmumukhang naka-unfurl yung American flag. Ayan, kasi kung wala itong horizontal pole na ito, babagsak. ay hindi makikita yung stars and stripes ng American flag. Kasi nga wala ngang hangin sa buwan eh. Kung wala itong horizontal pole, bagsak yan. Na hindi ganito yung itsura niya. Pero kung mapapansin po ninyo dito sa ating photograph, ayan po may horizontal pole. Alright po, ayan, ito po, ayan no. Talasan po yung mga mata. Ayan, tignan nyo po, ayan, mata. Ayan no. Diba? Ayan po mga ka-space, yun yung paliwanag. Na kaya nagmumukha siyang hinahangin. Alright, kasi kung wala ito, babagsak yan eh. Siyempre, proud yung mga Amerikano. They were able to set foot on the moon. Naunahan nila yung mga Russians. Eh siyempre, dapat they should present the American flag. Dapat ipakita nila yung American flag na flying high. Yeah, diba? Naka-unfurl. So, ganyan ang ginawa ng mga Apollo 11 astronauts and yung mga succeeding missions. Alright, yan. So a telescopic pole has been extended along the top in order to make the flag fly proudly. No? Because it's been set up like this, it appears to be waving in the wind. Ojha explains yan. All the wrinkles are there because it's literally been screwed up for 4 days. En route to the moon. Eh syempre, nakalukot yan eh. Diba? Eh hindi wala naman silang plancha para planchahin yung bandera. Diba? Eh nakarolyo yan eh. Habang nagbabiyahe sila sa buwan, nakarolyo yan o nakalukot. So nung in-unfurl nila, lukot yan. Kaya ganyan yung itsura niyan. Alangan naman planchahin pa nila yan sa loob ng lunar module, no? So ganyan po ang itsura ng American flag. Yan. So na-debunk na naman po yung conspiracy theory na yan. Alright mga ka-spacers. So siguro bago tayo magpatuloy, let's watch this video about dun sa American flag na yan. No? Bakit parang hinahangin yung American flag na yan. Alright, let's watch this mga ka-spacers. Let's go!
Number 1. The waving flag. One of the most infamous Apollo 11 conspiracy theories involves the pictures of the American flag taken by Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. In the iconic photos, the flag appears to be fluttering in the wind, which is admittedly odd seeing as how there's no atmosphere and by extension no wind on the moon. The reason Old Glory appears to be waving is because Neil and Buzz made it so. A wire was inserted in the top of the flag to keep it steady, and the astronauts created the waving effect as they were setting it up. In fact, once the flag was planted, it stopped waving completely.
Alright mga ka-spacers, so I hope that video had shed some light about the American flag that was planted by the Apollo 11 astronauts. Kasi nagmumukha nga na parang hinahangin. No? So ibig sabihin nun nasa studio lang sila at hindi sila nakarating sa buwan. Alright, so I hope yung video na yun ay nagbigay liwanag na talagang nakapunta sila sa buwan. No? Ang mga Apollo 11 astronauts, sila Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. Alright, so let's proceed now to our last conspiracy theory. Alright, so according to this, mga ka-spacers, if we really went to the moon in 1969, why have we never been back? Bakit daw tayo hindi nakabalik after ng Apollo 17? Kasi yung Apollo 17, yun na yung last. No? Pero after Apollo 17, hindi na tayo bumalik sa buwan. Bakit? Ano nangyari? No? Ibig sabihin nun, talagang di na ba, kaya ba natin talaga makapunta sa buwan? Kaya ba ng mga Amerikano? Ba't di na sila nakabalik sa buwan? No? So, ibig sabihin ba nun, japeke yung mga Apollo missions starting with Apollo 11 hanggang Apollo 17? Fake yun? Fake? Alright, so basahin natin yung artikulo mga ka-spacers. Now, Apollo 17, the last Apollo mission to land astronauts on the moon, took place in 1972. Since then, humans have never returned. Maybe that's because we never went to the moon in the first place. Yun ang sinasabi ng mga conspiracy theorists, no? Theorist. Ayan, alright? So, since na hindi na tayo nakabalik sa buwan, baka talagang hindi tayo nakapunta sa buwan in the first place. Hindi natin nakayanan, hindi na kaya ng mga Amerikano. Yung Saturn V, ibig sabihin, failure ang Saturn V. Aba, ayun po, no? Yun ang sinasabi ng mga conspiracy theorists na ito. Apollo 17 wasn't meant to be the end of the story. Of course, throughout the 1970s, there were ambitions to establish a permanent lunar base before turning to the next major space exploration challenge, which is a mission to Mars. Alright, it never happened, hindi nagmaterialize, no? But this was no grand conspiracy. Ayan. Ang paliwanag po niyan kasi, geopolitics. Ayan. Ito yung paliwanag ngayon, mga ka-spacers. Alright. The answer is, yung mga Amerikano, they have changed their priorities, sabi ni Professor Ojha. From a combination of the Vietnam War, yan kasi nung panahon na yan, tumitindi yung gera sa Vietnam. So, dun ngayon, kasi maraming mga Amerikano, mga American soldiers ang namamatay sa Vietnam War. It seems that the Americans were losing the Vietnam War. So, dun sila nag-focus ngayon. Alright, alam niyo naman kasi ang mga Amerikano kasi hindi sila masyadong sanay sa jungle warfare. Diyan magaling yung mga Vietcongs. Diba? Kaya medyo natatalo na. And besides, another reason kung bakit medyo maraming casualties sa mga American soldiers, sa jungle maraming lamok. No? And many American soldiers died not because of gunshots from the Vietcongs, pero namatay sila because of malaria. Ayun po. So malaria plus they were not trained for jungle warfare, hindi sila sanay sa ganon. So maraming casualties yung mga American soldiers ng panahon na yan. So medyo nagulintang ang presidente, no? So dun sila nga nag-focus. Alright? Ayan, so yun ang pinoproblema na ng Amerika. So yung mga pondo na dapat pupunta sa Apollo 18, actually may Apollo 18 kaso because of budget cuts, nag-iba sila ngayon ng priorities. Wala, na-cancel yung Apollo 18. Alright, so from a combination of the Vietnam War, but also there was this geopolitical element of thinking. We've won the race. Just as we've got good at doing science, onto the moon we abandoned it. Medyo lumaki ang ulo ng mga Amerikano. Nanalo na tayo sa space race. Natalo na natin yung mga Russians. Para saan pa ito, no? We have beaten the Russians to the moon. So para saan pa itong ginagawa natin? Nagsasaya lang tayo ng oras at pera. Huwag na natin ituloy. Yan ang isip ng mga Amerikano. Natalo na natin yung mga Russians so na-cancel yung Apollo 18. And besides, marami pang problema ang Amerika, no? Meron yung civil rights movement ng mga American blacks, 'di ba? And ito yung Vietnam War. Saka itong lumalaking ulo ng mga Amerikano, natalo na natin yung mga Russians na 'yan, 'di ba? And yung shifting in priorities, medyo nag-shift sila sa space station. Doon sila ngayon nag-focus sa Skylab. Right? And yung development ng space shuttle. Yan. Instead, attention turned to the space shuttle program and latterly the International Space Station. Pero ang mga Amerikano, nauna na yung Skylab. No? Yung Skylab yung unang-unang American Space Station. Doon sila nag-focus plus the development of the space shuttle. Alright. Which has been permanently inhabited by teams of astronauts since November of 2000. But that doesn't mean humans couldn't return to the moon in the future. Alright po mga ka-spacers, so ayan po yung mga conspiracy theories. Bakit pa tayo hindi nakabalik sa buwan, no? Actually, babalik tayo sa buwan. Americans will return to the moon through the Artemis lunar program. Alright mga ka-spacers, so let's watch this video about bakit hindi na tayo nakabalik sa buwan after Apollo 17. Alright mga ka-spacers, let's watch this!
Why did NASA stop going to the moon? In July 1969, Neil Armstrong famously took one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind, becoming an American hero and a cultural icon. Apollo 11 was by all accounts a success, enabling humans to finally visit our closest celestial neighbor. But while the heady highs of 1969 gave us our first steps on the lunar surface, just 3 years later in 1972, we'd made our last. This is Unveiled, and today we're answering the extraordinary question, why did NASA stop going to the moon? First, let's rewind. Why did NASA even go to the moon in the first place? Sure, it was an extraordinary achievement, but what exactly made people so desperate to get there in the 60s, since we've seemingly forgotten all about it today? One major motivator was the Cold War. Across the 50s and 60s especially, the Cold War was fought between the US and the USSR via technological one-upmanship in the arms race and the space race. Nuclear weapons were getting more and more powerful, though the lack of any actual conflict thankfully meant that none of them were being used. So both sides decided to use their rockets for something else, spaceflight. And the Soviets took a sizable early lead in the space race. In 1957, they launched the first ever satellite into orbit, Sputnik, and later in the same year, they sent the first animal into orbit, Laika the dog, in Sputnik 2. The Soviet probe Luna 2 became the first ever craft to even reach the moon in 1959. Then in 1961, the USSR sent the first man into space, Yuri Gagarin, and 2 years after that the first woman, Valentina Tereshkova. By contrast, America didn't send a woman into space until Sally Ride in 1983. And back when the first 2 Sputniks were launched, the US didn't even have a space program at all. NASA wasn't formed until 1958 as a direct result of the Cold War. So after the Soviets quickly accomplished a heap of major milestones for space exploration, it was then down to the USA to do something really impressive. They didn't settle on the moon landing right away though, briefly proposing an alternative plan called Project A119, which was an alleged US Air Force scheme to detonate a nuclear bomb on the moon. Luckily, when NASA was formed, the powers that be decided to send people to the moon instead of weapons, after wisely guessing that the public probably wouldn't appreciate a nuke in the sky. And so the race was on, and the US were in catch-up mode, as the United States government pumped as much money as possible into the Apollo program. In 1966, NASA received its biggest ever share of the US federal budget, 4.5%. This was $5.9 billion back then, but around $43 billion today. For perspective, NASA's 2019 kitty equals just less than 0.5% of the federal budget at $21 billion. So they're now given less than half the money they once had. In reality, the Apollo space program was ludicrously expensive, and critics of the moon landing labeled it as just one big publicity stunt designed to triumph over the Soviet Union. Of course, it was also an incredible achievement for science and humanity, launching an interest in space travel that remains today. But as soon as Apollo 11 actually won the space race, the government started looking for any excuse to shelve it and save some money. Overall, the Apollo space program that ended with Apollo 17 in 1972 cost around $150 billion in today's money. And while the space race effectively ended in 1969, the Cold War didn't, and the intentions of the government turned elsewhere. But NASA itself, created expressly to put a man on the moon, never totally lost interest in one day returning to our closest neighbor. It only lost the state funding to do so. Nevertheless, with NASA seemingly slowing down their efforts, more and more other space agencies turned their eye to the moon instead. Up until 1990, all prospective lunar missions were dominated by the Americans and the Soviets, but then came the launch of the Haiten from ISAS, Japan's former space program. After that, the number of moon missions planned by other countries grew and grew. The current Japanese space program, JAXA, have continued to study the moon, as has the European Space Agency and also ISRO in India. So on an international scale, just because we're no longer sending people moonwards doesn't mean we're not still studying it. probes and rovers are simply a much more cost-effective and comparatively risk-free option compared to humans. They don't need food, water, or oxygen, and there's zero danger of illness, injury, or death. One of the most significant current lunar leaders is the Chang'e 4 spacecraft sent by the CNSA, China's official space program. The Chang'e 4 is our first craft to land on the fabled dark side of the moon. For some, the move marks the start of a new space race, or new moon race, between China and America. Only this time the US isn't playing catch-up. For others though, there's no longer a competition at all, and space travel has become a much more collaborative process. Because while the likes of China pushed the boundaries of what was previously possible, NASA hasn't simply been twiddling its thumbs since 1972. In fact, the agency reportedly does have plans to put people back on the moon by the late 2020s, and they did already launch a revitalized moon initiative, the Constellation program, in 2005, although this was subsequently cancelled in 2011, again due to cut government spending. What else has happened since the curtain came down on the Apollo missions? Well, the International Space Station for one. A project again more focused on turning space exploration into a united effort, it's jointly operated by 5 different space agencies from around the world. Advocates for the ISS say it holds significantly more promise than another moon landing ever could, given that it serves as an excellent resource to study the effects of actually living and working in outer space. Meanwhile, the moon is still a bleak and desolate prospect by comparison, meaning once again that NASA's funds are more likely to be spent elsewhere. But of course, it isn't only the ISS that NASA and the government prefers to spend its money on. There's also that other new and exciting prospect that so many have their sights geared towards, Mars. The Mars race is still bubbling away, albeit at a much slower rate than the original space race did, perhaps because there isn't a war to fuel it. And NASA certainly has aims to go to Mars, having already sent various probes and rovers to the Red Planet. Earth's other state-funded agencies also seem bound for Mars, but what makes this race seem different to any other is the power, influence, and potential victory of private companies. Nowadays, NASA also contends with, or works with, the likes of Boeing, Virgin, and SpaceX, and the global focus has decidedly shifted away from the moon, which now, by comparison, doesn't even seem so far away. Today, there are other, even more distant dreams to be had, demanding even greater amounts of time, expertise, and money. Finally, and despite all the indications that NASA has gone cold on the moon for other reasons, there are some more outlandish theories out there. There's the well-peddled conspiracy theory that the moon landings never happened in the first place, and NASA just can't be bothered to fake elaborate lunar missions anymore. There's the idea that humans haven't gone back to the moon for almost 50 years for fear of aliens that supposedly reside there. And there's the notion that the dark side of the moon actually houses a fleet of deadly extraterrestrial spaceships, or that the moon itself is but a hollow spaceship primed to launch. They're all real theories, but not exactly real science, and the likeliest truth simply isn't quite so exciting. Sending humans to the moon is an expensive business, and NASA doesn't have the financial firepower it once did. Throw into the mix an increasing demand to send explorers to another planet entirely, and it becomes an even greater task for the agency to balance the books. While renewed plans to send people and probes to explore the lunar surface prove that interest in the moon hasn't gone away, unfortunately, the money has. And that's why NASA stopped going to...
Alright mga ka-spacers, so ayan po yung mga ibang conspiracy theories about the Apollo 11 landing. So kung meron pa ho kayong idadagdag or kung gusto nyo mag-input about kung pinag-uusapan natin ngayon, please feel free to type in your comments or your reactions in our comment section below. So kahit tapos na itong live stream natin, ituloy nyo lang po yung ating discussion. And gusto ko marinig yung inyong mga comments, your reactions, yung mga inputs about kung mga conspiracy theories about the Apollo 11. And again po mga ka-spacers, no, kung ako yung tatanungin ninyo, sir, naniniwala ba kayo na talagang nakapunta ang mga Amerikano sa buwan? Ang sasagot ko po ay oo. I believe that the Americans, the Apollo 11 astronauts have stepped foot on the moon. And kung babalik tayo sa buwan, yes, we will return to the moon through the Artemis lunar program. Ayan, kasi ang buwan kasi is the gateway to Mars. So dapat unahin nila yung buwan. No, they should establish a lunar base para doon sila mag-assemble ng isang spaceship that would bring humans to Mars. Ayan po, yun yung aking opinion about the importance of returning to the moon. And besides, ang moon kasi maraming mga mineral resources na pwede nating itap na magiging kailangan dito sa Earth. Alright, so ayan na po yung ating discussion about the mga conspiracy theories about the Apollo 11 landing. So mga ka-spaces, bago tayo magtapos, again, please like and share this video so that we could reach more people. Lalong-lalo na po yung mga estudyante so that they would be engaged and be inspired to love the sciences. Please follow us on our Facebook page, the Beden Society of Young Astronomers. Follow us on our Facebook page, the Skywatcher Society of Las Piñas. And follow me on my Facebook page, the Science Guy Kaspacers channel. And please don't forget to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, the Science Guy Professor Jun Cajigal. And don't forget to click on that notification bell so that you would be updated on my future videos. Yan, bilang tulong nyo na yun sa akin mga Kaspacers, para magpatuloy po yung ating ginagawa to spread the good news of science and technology. Alright po, so marami pong salamat sa inyong walang sawang pagtutok dito sa ating programa. This is your Kaspacer and Space Commander, Professor Jun Cajigal, saying live long and prosper. And don't forget mga Kaspacers to always keep your space. Alright, see you on our next episode. Bye-bye! Bye mga Kaspacers. Like and share.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have ignition.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone.